Let's talk about Open Water, the 2003 adventure drama horror film that is based on the true story of a young couple who are accidentally left stranded in shark-infested waters on an organised scuba diving trip. This one is pure, undiluted nightmare fuel for myself, and it hits a little too close to home for one main reason. Now, you probably never heard it before, but I've actually had a close encounter with a shark myself. I've teased it for a little while on the channel now, but let me know down in the comments if you'd like me to share that story in full. Back to the video. Susan and Daniel are our protagonists in this film, a very normal couple in their mid-30s who have decided to book a last-minute trip to go scuba diving as a short getaway from their busy lives. If you watch my review of The Reef with Connor, you can probably tell that I'm a massive fan of shark films, but I do have a love-hate relationship with them though, and I've certainly had to weed my way through the absolute dross of the industry, but every now and again there's a shark film that's an absolute gem. And straight off the bat, I just want to say that what this film does brilliantly is it encompasses my primal fear of the ocean's deadliest predator, and through cinematography it makes you feel like you're experiencing the hysteria alongside the characters. Now, as an adult, I'm quite happy to declare that I'm actually quite afraid of the ocean, and through the experience that I've had in real life and combining these with what I've seen in cinema, this has definitely fueled a deep thalassophobic fear of what lies beneath. Open Water was shot on a low budget of $120,000, but don't let that fool you into thinking that the film isn't full of quality. It was a rousing success and netted almost $56 million at the box office. This leads me on to my first point, which is authenticity. The film does such a great job of depicting an authentic relationship between the couple, from chasing a fly around a hotel room to joking on with each other when you're trying to brush your teeth and you're elbowing your partner out the way. The interactions between Daniel and Susan are just so effortless. The phatic talk between a couple, the simple conversation, the communicative investment in each other's lives. Every sentence uttered doesn't have an intrinsic purpose like in most movies. It's just an everyday conversation, a couple exchanging words with each other, sometimes to make observations, sometimes just to fill a void of silence. This brings an enormous amount of normality to the characterization of Susan and Daniel, and as a result, I identified with them a lot closer. There's a few elements of foreshadowing in the opening segments of the film. Daniel has packed a car and he's waiting for Susan, his wife, to leave the house and join him in the car ready to go. But Susan's held up on a work call, and as she enters the car, Daniel says to Susan, "I thought we said no phones." Now, this is a very clever yet subtle dialogue inclusion that hints at the couple slowly detaching themselves from a moving, interconnected world. Daniel is mildly annoyed at Susan for being held up on the phone to work colleagues, but later in the film he performs a complete U-turn as he reminisces, saying that this scenario sounds like heaven to him. And similarly, whilst the couple are also enjoying a few days on their trips, Susan also snaps a novelty photograph of Daniel putting his head inside of a shark's mouth. Now, I must say, that's extremely well placed dark humour. Some very clever writing here, early doors. But that's enough scene setting. Let's get on to why we're all here, the nightmare fuel. Susan and Daniel board a small boat ran by the local diving school in the area and head out into the ocean with a party of around about 20 divers. The instructors take a visual head count when everybody's on board so that nobody's left behind. Now, straight away, the potential failure points in this method are catastrophic and not something you're likely to see in a more professional diving school such as PADI. The divers are instructed to dive in pairs and have 35 minutes under the water before returning to the boat. Susan and Daniel begin their dive with everybody else and are seen to swim off and do their own thing. I'd say they're qualified to dive at a decent level, as you need a particular standard of certification to even perform an open water dive. After the 35 minutes are up, they resurface only to find that their boat isn't anywhere near them. They're stuck in the middle of two boats, roughly about equal distance from each other, both of which don't come to collect them. Before long, a single inquisitive reef shark enters the area to check them out. Now, I must say, I was extremely surprised at the composure of the two divers on this first shark sighting. They didn't really react to the shark, and they didn't panic, and they huddled together to protect their territory. This is instantly better than 99% of shark films out there, which display completely idiotic actions and decisions. Susan quickly points out that the coral formation that Daniel used as a diving marker isn't beneath them anymore. This confirms that the couple have indeed been drifting the whole time, which will explain how they ended up so far away from their boat. They're at the mercy of the ocean at this point, and as experienced divers, they know now that this is a really bad situation. To further this point, the experience of the divers shows as they keep the composure under the stressful situation. The first sighting of the shark doesn't seem to faze them much. They discuss briefly if they've seen a shark, before later on discussing that they're starting to get a little bit cold. It's in the second instance of the shark emerging meters away from them that sparks them into life, but they still remain composed. This shark is inquisitive and it just isn't going going away. The first thing that really unsettled me was Susan saying, "I can't stand not knowing what's under me." This is the first instance of nightmare fuel here. Susan touches upon the primal fear that many of us mere mortals have, a fear of the deep, dark depths of the abyss. I don't know about you, but there's something about bobbing on the surface and having your head above the water that's so much more terrifying than actually being fully submerged and being able to see what's beneath you, even though you're further in the water. And it's at this point that Susan knew she was in aggressive shark-infested waters, and I just can't begin to comprehend the vulnerability she felt here. Shortly after this, the couple endure a few jellyfish stings, but little do they know that this is just the warm-up to the main event. The resolve of Susan begins to weaken, and she becomes increasingly cold, tired, and vulnerable to the elements of the open ocean. The characters are taunted by passing boats, but they're always too far away to spot them, and it's highly unlikely that those boats are even looking for divers in the water in the first place. Susan begins to feel really nauseous from the bobbing up and down, and if you've ever been on a boat before, this is a horrendous feeling. You can't make it stop. You can't just pull over and get off like you can in a car. Now imagine being in the ocean, bobbing up and down, for hours and hours, dehydrated, in shark-infested waters. I honestly can't think of many worse circumstances than this. Feeling ill and exhausted, Susan drifts off to sleep in Daniel's arms, but as Daniel also drifts off to sleep from fatigue, both of them become separated. The scene which follows this is absolutely terrifying to watch. Alone and isolated in the water, multiple sharks swim beneath Susan. She's completely unaware, but they're right there, waiting, stalking, and lurking. Their presence is known to the viewer, but she's completely oblivious. This scene shows just how vulnerable Susan is, to the point where she's received a violent thud from one of the sharks, which wakes her up. Got to tip my hat to these two actors. Both were actually in the ocean for filming amongst these sharks, and had nothing but chainmail underneath their diving suits as a protective layer. Can we just appreciate the guts of Blanchard Ryan and Daniel Travis here? The couple experience a short spell of relief when Susan finds some sweets in her pocket before diving, but the sharks begin to show increased aggression and drag Daniel under the water for a second. The camera shot used here pans above the heads of the couple, and it's extremely powerful. The scene shows blood circulating the couple. As Susan looks at Daniel's leg, I can't stress how real the bite mark looks here. It's not some Hollywood dramatization where his whole calf muscle's just suddenly gone. The sharks came in for an investigative bite and ripped away some flesh. The blood looks real. It isn't a deep dark red. It doesn't look like red wine. It's something that's progressively seeping out of his body into the ocean. And if the sharks aren't already curious at this point, this really isn't a good sign and is definitely going to spark a frenzy. Daniel begins to panic at this point, and Susan takes over as the rock of the group, offering words of reassurance and encouragement. This really hit me because I'm the type of person where if somebody I trust says something's going to be okay, I lean into that. But if the person that I trust starts panicking, it sends me into overdrive. And you can really see here the role swap between Daniel and Susan, which sparks a real shift in the momentum of the film. Daniel's condition begins to worsen, and oh my days, nighttime comes. They've been in the water for hours. Can you imagine being in the ocean in the pitch black? There's thunder and lightning above, there's sharks below them getting closer and closer, having already took a bite. The imagery, the audio, the dialogue, it's just terrifying. The couple are vulnerable from every angle imaginable, and as a viewer you can only see that it's just a matter of time. They're just waiting to be taken at this point. When morning breaks, Daniel has already died of blood loss. A Caribbean chorus plays over the scene as Susan kisses goodbye to him and lets him drift away. I go as far as saying as it's quite an emotional scene. These two people have done nothing wrong to deserve this, but they've just stumbled upon disastrous circumstances. Daniel's lifeless corpse drifts further and further from Susan as the sharks identify and strike his vulnerable shell. Nature is in its flow state and is truly on display here. It's not an aggressive shark that leaps 3 meters out of the water to take him under. He's just pulled under, and that's the end. There's almost a sense of peace to the scene, and in turn, that is absolutely harrowing. The cam work here is really, really effective as it frenetically dips above and below the surface line. As it shows beneath, there's a frenzy of sharks gathered, waiting. The camera glazes across Susan's eyes as she weighs up her limited options, and you can really see the cogs turning in her head here. She calmly removes her diving belt, pushes it to one side, and simply slips beneath the surface. This scene is extremely disturbing. Again, she isn't decapitated by an angry shark. She comes to the realization in a very calm, accepting manner that she's now at the bottom of the food chain and she isn't going to be found, and decides that now is the time to end things. I've often asked myself the question many times in this scene, did Susan drown herself, or did she offer herself to the sharks? Either way, the scene depicts serious helplessness, with a pretty much suicidal climax. The overarching situation as a whole is what fuels my nightmares of this film. Human error causes two good people to be trapped in an inescapable situation that inevitably ends in their demise. Oh, and it's based on a true story as well, just to add even more legitimacy to the scare factor of open water. So what did you think of the film? Has it made you question taking a pedalo into the sea the next time you're on a beach? Let me know down in the comments. I've been Hugh from Unleash the Ghouls, and I'll see you later.